Yo, check this, episode 57, Vanessa Spina, the Ketogenic Girl. Okay, we're talking the benefits of ketogenic diets. Let's go.
Welcome to Solving Healthcare. I'm Kwadwo Kyeremanteng. I'm an ICU and palliative care physician here in Ottawa and the founder of Resource Optimization Network. We are on a mission to transform healthcare in Canada. I'm going to talk with physicians, nurses, administrators, patients and their families because inefficiencies, overwork, and overcrowding affects us all. I believe it's time for a better healthcare system that's more cost-effective, dignified, and just for everyone involved.
Welcome back, everybody. I am excited. I am stoked because there is so much exciting things happening in the world of solving healthcare, and we can't wait to continue to bring you this unreal content. As I've preached before, COVID-19, one of the best ways that we could do to combat that is become fitter, become healthier, improve our metabolic profile. So we are having on August 9th, 3:30 p.m., our first virtual summit on low-carb and ketogenic approaches to health. We got Joy Kitty, we got Ivor Cummins, and Dr. Paul Mason, all making a guest appearance. $20 for the basic package, $59.99 for our premium package, which includes recordings, audio, video, and being part of our Q&A session. It's going to be unbelievable. It's going to be glorious. Get your tickets while you can. I'm so proud of this event. Thanks for everybody that's contributed. One quick shout out to our fans in Perth, Ontario. Y'all have been reaching out like crazy. We love you. Keep up the good work. Thanks so much for the support. All right, let me tell you about our guest today, the Ketogenic Girl, Vanessa Spina. I am so excited. She is not only a podcaster, a coach, a sports nutritionist, an author of Keto Essentials cookbook, which we'll talk about in a second, and her show, Fast Keto with Ketogenic Girl. Unbelievable. Great value in terms of the science of ketogenic approaches and intermittent fasting as well. And I thought she was a perfect guest to talk about. I thought she was a perfect guest to introduce our audience to ketogenic diets. And this, to me, as I'm learning about it, I'm just continued to be baffled at this concept that people are coming off their diabetic meds, people are coming off their antihypertensives in weeks, like not months, like in weeks with some of these approaches. And so, I mean, I thought we have a duty to bring this to you guys. So in this episode, she tells you her story in terms of why she got into ketogenic diet, in terms of improving her health and improving her metabolic profile. We talk about the overall benefits in terms of weight loss, in terms of mood, in terms of energy. We talk about some of the concerns and some of the myths when it comes to ketogenic diets. My personal love, we got to talk about the athletic performance and recovery, some of the benefits of that. And this took a turn that we weren't expecting, but we also talked about in the ICU, ironically, some of the how we feed our critically ill patients and why we might be needing to think about the approach of these refined carbohydrates and how this might not be benefiting our patients. So a lot to cover. It was such a fun episode. So without further ado, podcaster, coach, sports nutritionist, author, Vanessa Spina. Quadcast Nation, I am so excited to bring to you the Ketogenic Girl, Vanessa Spina. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I am honored to be here on your show today.
Thank you so much. To me, this is a big step for us because, we've talked a lot about different approaches to improving metabolic health, and I'm a huge fan of intermittent fasting. I've been doing that for over 2.5 years. But the ketogenic approaches to health have been a complete mystery to me, and I think there's a lot of upside potentially, especially we were just talking beforehand about COVID and how, some of these approaches could benefit and improve their metabolic profile. But Vanessa, why don't we start with your story? I find I love your story in terms of how you got to where you are now. So let us know, tell us about your story.
Sure. Well, I used to work in finance. I had my stockbroker's license in Vancouver. I worked in a totally different sector, and I just always had poor metabolic health. And I knew that something wasn't right because every day I woke up and it was like, what's going to hurt today? Like, am I going to have a headache or a sore back or, any infinite number of issues. And I also was carrying extra weight that I just couldn't get off, even though I was exercising all the time. And I was doing what I was told was the healthiest diet, which was actually a plant-based diet from the age of 17. So for about 17 years, I was vegetarian, and I really believed that that was, the holy grail of health, was to be plant-based and don't eat any fat, really sort of minimize your proteins, as much as you can to healthy plant-based sources of it, and eat tons of carbs. And I didn't realize that I was feeling like I was 9 years old in my 20s, and I remember going to my parents' house and my dad's like, why are you so tired all the time? Like, why are you just laying on the couch? Like, when I was your age, I had all this energy. And I was like, Dad, I don't know. Like, I wish I knew, but I'm just so tired all the time. And I actually found I had tried every different diet and nothing had really worked for me, obviously, because I made it to plant-based, like vegetarian. I think I had a couple years of raw vegan in there too, fruitarian, all the things we're told are the healthiest for us. And if fruit and vegetables are the healthiest, most nutritious things in our diet, then eating all of them all the time must be the healthiest thing you can do, right? And I didn't realize how wrong I was. So I started finding different strategies that actually worked. And the first one that worked for me was intermittent fasting. And I started trying that out and having an eating window of 8 hours in the day and fasting for 16 hours. And that made a huge difference. And then when I started doing a keto approach, which was about 6 years ago, they naturally go very well together because the more well-nourished you are and the less of a glucose or sugar dependent, like sugar burner you are, the more fat adapted and ketone adapted you are, the easier it is to fast. So the two really go really well together. And a lot of people who go keto end up naturally intermittent fasting because they forget to eat because they're so well nourished. And one of the main benefits is that your blood sugar stays extremely stable, whereas on a high carb diet, your blood glucose has these large excursions up and down. And when glucose goes up, it must come down. And when it comes down is when we experience feelings of hunger. And if you're on a high carb diet, you're going to be hungry all the time, and your blood sugar will be rising and falling all throughout the day. So it's going to be difficult to not be irritable and have a stable mood and all of that. So there are so many wonderful things that can happen when you start to adopt a diet that is more made up of the macronutrients that we really need, which are found in protein and fat. And making those changes, I finally saw drastic change in the way I felt, the way I looked. I had effortless weight loss. I stopped thinking about food all the time, and I just started feeling full of energy. So I just couldn't believe the change it made. And this happens to just about everyone who do this kind of struggle for years and then finds low carb or keto. They become like evangelical about it because they're so excited and so happy about how much it changed their lives that they want to tell everyone, and there's a meme on the internet of like Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's like a keto person going to people's door, like, can I tell you about keto today? And because you really get excited about how much change can happen just from changing what you put in your mouth. And it's just like you were saying before, like you're seeing people being able to go off medications and all these things, and it's just from changing what they eat. And it's very simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy to do for most people.
No, that's beautiful, Vanessa. It's funny you said, like, so one of our producers, Tanya Croft, she's the one that led me to you actually. And she was one of those like Jehovah Witness preachers every day about the benefits, not only from the weight loss, but that she won't mind me saying, but from inflammation, autoimmune disease, that approach. And so, yeah, I could hear her in my ear right now, throwing down some knowledge about the benefits. And so, just to be clear, Vanessa, from your standpoint, so you had helped
in terms of weight loss. It helped in terms of, aches and pains. How about like mood? How about energy? All those stuff, were those altered as well?
That was the biggest thing for me. And, one of the big problems with the diet that I was doing before is that it was causing a lot of inflammation that I wasn't aware of. And we're now starting to understand the disease model is all rooted in inflammation. It's the root of all modern disease is inflammation and metabolic dysregulation. And I'm talking about chronic, non-infectious disease that is out there. You can trace it usually back to inflammation or a metabolic dysregulation. So the diet that I was doing, like I said, was high carb. My blood sugar was up and down all day, but I didn't know why. My moods would go up and down with my blood sugar. I would get very irritable when my blood sugar was falling, because when your blood sugar is falling, you feel like it's a very uncomfortable feeling for humans. We don't like to feel that way. And that's why, I would have my breakfast, and then 2 hours later, I'd go down to Starbucks and get a snack and, a latte. And then 2 hours later, I was thinking like about lunch. And then after lunch, I was thinking about, and I was always constantly thinking about what to eat because my essential nutrients were not being met. And I was in this blood sugar roller coaster. And when you go off of that high carb diet, don't think all carbs are bad, and we can talk about that. Just like with fats, there's good carbs, there's bad carbs, there's bad fats, there's better fats for you. But when you get off that, your blood sugar becomes very stable and your mood does too. So I had huge improvements just in my mood stability, my ability to be patient, compassionate, and just more present, because, when you're fat fueled, you're not always dependent on more glucose coming in, because we are fat storing machines. We store so much energy on our bodies, but we can't tap into that stored energy if you're not fat adapted and you're eating every 2 hours. You're putting your body constantly in a state where insulin is being secreted, and insulin suppresses lipolysis or fat burning. So if insulin's constantly being stimulated all throughout the day, you're never going to get into fat burning mode where your blood sugar can become very stable, and your mood can too, because you are fuel independent. You have your own fuel stores on your body and you can readily access them, as opposed to running around with all this fuel stored on you and you can't access it because you're eating all the time, so you have to constantly eat. It's quite a bad cycle to be in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to add to your point too, like the being like pro insulin, like I think it promotes fat genesis. I don't know, I'm brain farting on the word lipogenesis. Lipogenesis. But so yeah, like I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. So maybe just like we're all 4 years old, like what does it truly mean to be on a ketogenic diet? Because like some people think like you cannot have you can never have a carb. It's got to be a specific carb. Like what exactly does it mean to be ketogenic or low carb or whatever spectrum you want to throw down, Vanessa?
Spectrum is really the most important word that you brought up, because there's lots of different stages, and people think that you're either in or out, that you're either burning fat or you're not burning any at all. And there's a lot of nuance in that, because our bodies are so much more complex than we realize. But basically, a ketogenic diet is defined in different ways, but the actual ultimate definition of it is a diet where your body is making ketones. And it's really fascinating, but your body makes ketones from fat, and it can make it from the fat that you eat or the fat on your body. And the reason it makes ketones is that they're tiny pieces of fat that are small enough to cross the blood-brain barrier. So our brain is mostly fueled by glucose, but if we don't have a lot of glucose around, our bodies will make ketones in order to keep our brain alive. And so it makes these tiny little pieces of fat, which are ketones. So there's been a lot of hype in the last few years. If you can drink ketones, it'll put you in ketosis. Not really. If you drink ketones, you'll be able to measure them in your blood. That's basically what happens. But the easiest way to do it is to restrict your carbohydrate. And that level is going to be different for different people depending on how active they are. So a very active person can go as high as 100 grams of carb and even get a lot of the benefits of ketogenesis. But someone who's not very active and has been on a high carb diet for a long time will have to usually keep them below 20 grams or below of total carbohydrate in order to get themselves into ketosis. And so doing that will deplete glycogen, which is the stored glucose that we have in our liver and our muscles. Within a few days, you'll deplete that, and then your body will start making this secondary fuel, which is ketones. And it's really fascinating. People experience all kinds of benefits from ketones because they are signaling molecules in the body, just like a lot of other hormones in our body signal. Ketones actually signal different pathways in our body, and some of those pathways are similar to some of the ones that we see in calorie restriction, where people have longevity benefits. A lot of the benefits of fasting and all these things are activated by these ketones. So they're really amazing molecules, and the body makes them for us because it provides a secondary fuel source for the heart, for the brain, but also I really believe that our bodies were just meant to be fueled by them on a regular basis. And it's our modern diets of convenience where we're eating a lot of glucose constantly that we just never tap into that ability that's built in to burn our own fat that we store for times of scarcity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing I've been curious about, and you alluded to it to a certain extent, like how easy truly is it to get to that state? Like, I mean, as you mentioned, if you're more athletic or you're more active, you allow yourself more carbs. But, say, for example, if it is at less than 100 grams, do I have to, is that over a course of 24 hours? Do I have to be fasting for extended periods of time, for example?
No, so that would be in a day. And I mean, a lot of people know you can measure your blood glucose and ketones. So if you were to do, it typically would happen within anywhere from 3 to 5 days that you would deplete your glycogen enough that your liver would start actively making ketones. But there's also other hacks. People, if you fast for 24 hours, you're going to deplete all your glycogen. So if you fast for a day, say you fast from Sunday night to Tuesday morning, which a lot of people do, they'll do like this metabolic Monday that's been popularized in our community by a podcaster known as Metabolic Mike. So if you were to fast for 24 hours, you would deplete your glycogen enough. But for most people, you don't need to fast. It's just 3 to 5 days of keeping your carbs. I would start off by doing it as low as possible. So 20 to 50 grams per day. So that's just in a day. And then your body should start making ketones based on that. And for a lot of people, they also need to moderate protein at the beginning to just about like still a decent amount, but you moderate it down to probably around the average intake that people do right now. And a lot of people think that you need to eat a lot of fat, but it depends on your body composition. So if you have a lot of fat on your body, you don't really need to eat a lot of fat. Just eat the fat that naturally comes in whole foods. But if you don't have a lot of fat on your body, you do need to add fat in order for your body to be able to make ketones if you don't have a lot on your body.
Well, thanks for that, Vanessa. That's helpful. The one thing, I mean, I don't want to make it about me, but anytime I've been relatively low carb in a day, just by accident, say, because as we talked about before, I love gluten. Being 3 days low carb, to me, that's got to be difficult at first, no?
Yeah, I think it's just the change. It depends on the person. And, if you've been doing high carb for a long time and you're used to eating a lot of carbs and you enjoy that, the bottom line is carbs are carbohydrates and fats are hydrocarbons. So they're both just energy, and one is much more dense and one is less dense. So that's why both carbohydrates and fats taste delicious. So a lot of people don't really have that tough of a time with it. If you eat a lot of fat, you're going to be enjoying your food. It's going to be delicious in the same way that eating a high carb diet is. But you're not going to get that instant energy rush that you get when you eat carbs. But I really think that a healthy low carb or keto diet, you can get so many of the benefits just from doing low carb. And I think it's just keeping your carbs to whole forms, like the real food forms, not the processed forms. And it's the same thing with fats. Like one of the benefits of keto is you focus on whole food fats. So, saturated fats that come in the animal foods themselves, like the fat in eggs, the fat in meat, the fat in fish, they're all really healthy fats. And you get rid of the toxic seed oils that are very inflammatory. And so seed oils and sugar, they're both very inflammatory in the body. So I think you can have a really well-rounded diet that still has healthy carbs in it. If you're an active person, you can still have, your sweet potato or, rice or bread, but you just moderate it a bit and you don't eat that all day long. They can have a place, but a lot of the people that come to keto initially were not the athletes. We're seeing more athletes come to it now, and that's my specialty, being a sports nutrition specialist. But at the beginning, it's more just people who needed to lose weight. And they're not athletes, they're not super active all the time. So if that's the situation, then carbs really have to be restricted in order to get into that state of ketogenesis. But if you're an active person, like you said you are, you can probably burn that off. So, you just measure it.
But you make a great point. Actually, like a lot of this, I think, once again, personally, I find is like that gratification you get initially when you ingest your carbs. And I mean, I think there's a lot of delicious ketogenic like recipes, dishes that can achieve these things. And maybe you could speak a little bit. I know this is a big topic, but maybe even just personally, like a typical, choose whatever you want to choose, lunch, breakfast, dinner, like a typical dinner that you would love, to give people a sense of like how, like, realistic it would be to have this approach.
It's very realistic. I like to approach my diet as protein focused, protein centered, and low carb. I consider it keto, because I restrict the carbohydrate most days to somewhere between 20 to 50 grams of carb total in a day. But I can tell you, average breakfast plates are so easy on keto. It's the easiest thing is bacon and eggs. If you like bacon and eggs, I love steak and eggs or burger patty eggs. Burgers,
yes.
Call them brunch.
My language.
Eggs Benny is one of the keto staples, but instead of the toast or the English muffin, you can make a keto bread with it, or you can just have more eggs and more salmon or more ham and hollandaise sauce. So that's a super delicious breakfast. I love to do a lot of steak myself. We eat a lot of steak and salad, steak salads, Cobb salad. They're some of the favorite meals. Burger salad. I mean, you're centering the plate around really healthy proteins, whether that's beef, salmon. Those are some of the, best sources of protein that you can get, healthy turkey, chicken, all these great sources of protein, and adding some low starch vegetables. So I love to have salad with mine. I usually pair my steak with a really nice salad and a really tasty salad dressing with it. And there's so many different desserts. Like I make a protein collagen ice cream that I love to have for dessert. There's so many incredible foods, and a lot of the things are a lot simpler than people would realize. You can still have lots of mayo. You just want to make sure that your mayonnaise isn't made from canola oil, it's made from avocado oil, or it's made from, a fat that is more stable and saturated fats. So it's really just the fats that naturally come in our foods. And that's why we want to eat whole eggs. Don't throw away the yolks, or don't just eat the whites. You want to make sure that if you're having, steak, you don't have to dip it in butter unless you like that. But you're eating the fats that come with the protein naturally. And it's just a really simple, healthy way of living. I love to have yogurt too as a snack. I like to do plain yogurt, and you can add some stevia or sweetener to it. And you're just really cutting back on those like really sugary foods. Like a plain Greek yogurt is so delicious with a little bit of natural sweetener in it or some cinnamon. And you don't ever really feel like you're sacrificing much on the diet.
It's
really it. A lifestyle.
I mean, everything you're throwing down sounds scrumptious. We should also mention, if you're going to go, actually, you might have said already, if we're going to go carb, like some of the low glycemic carbs, you mentioned sweet potato. Any other ones that come to mind? You also mentioned, I think,
sweet potato, it would be better for someone who's resistance or strength training. So
someone
who's doing strength training or is an athlete, then, they're going to burn those carbs off just fine. But, like with my husband, he does a low carb, and we like choose his carbs, per day. So if he's going to have, sweet potato with one meal, then the other meal he'll just have, bacon and eggs, like for his breakfast or whatever. So you have an allotment every day, of those carbs you can have, and you just kind of choose them. Like some people choose to have like a really dry wine, and then, then don't have any carbs like with your dinner. So it's really simple, but a lot of the green vegetables are the lowest starch ones. The ones that grow above ground are the best for keto. So, all the green veggies, anything that you can find like in salads, and those kinds of vegetables are really the best. A lot of people like cruciferous vegetables, broccoli. People make everything and anything out of cauliflower. I mean, pizza, all kinds of things you can do with that. But the most nutrient-dense foods are animal foods. And, I've got so many charts showing this. You just look at, we are always told that the superfoods are like the blueberries and the kale and all that, but they pale in comparison to the amount of nutrients that are in animal foods. And the absorption of them is so low compared to animal food. So that's why people start to feel so incredibly well and energized and good on these diets, because they're really nutritious.
I've been dying to ask somebody this question. Actually, there's two things. I'm busting them out so I don't forget. One, the worry about having too much fat. You know what I'm saying? If you're doing a lot of animal meat and so forth, that's the first or second. But I've never had a good answer in terms of what is the added value of, like, what are you truly getting from vegetables? This sounds so stupid. I know a physician's asking this question, but are you getting that much more nutrients? Is it the fiber? Because what I'm hearing about the carnivore, as your like carnivore approaches, like once again, it's not my approach, but I'm learning more about these things, is that they're saying you could get all your nutrients from meat. And so this is a very novel concept to me, because, medical school, you learn, Canada Food Guide, all the basics there. So, as an expert in the field, I would love to hear your opinion on this bad boy.
Yeah, this is amazing. I mean, if you look at some of the charts side by side comparing vegetables and plant foods that we are told are the healthiest for us, and you compare them to animal foods, there's really no comparison in how many micronutrients are actually in the animal foods compared to plant foods. And in some cases, there have been studies where some foods, like someone was eating oysters, and their absorption of zinc went down when they ate it with corn or beans. Like, some of these foods can actually interfere with our absorption. So, some of the superfoods that we know of are not really superfoods when you compare them to foods like oysters. They're some of the healthiest foods in the world. Especially right now, we're talking about zinc so much, how much we need zinc. It's one of the best sources of zinc out there. liver. I eat every week liver pate that I make, and it has every single nutrient in there.
Love liver pate.
It is amazing. And if you look at the nutrient profile, it has every single nutrient, virtually every single nutrient that you need. And in some cases, just off the page, like 4 or 5 times the amount of vitamin A. It's absolutely incredible how much nutrition is actually in animal foods, and not just liver. I mean, just beef. Like just beef itself blows away like kale and blueberries and carrots and all these foods that we're told that have, all the nutrients in them. So they have micronutrients in them. Plant foods do, vegetables do, but that's not what we should be prioritizing to get our nutrients. You can add them in. I add in salad for variety and flavor, but I know that my main nutrients are coming from the animal foods and not from the salad on the side. And it's amazing how wrong we've really gotten this, and what a halo effect that vegetables have that they give to fruits, which they have a lot of fructose in them. So again, if you're really athletic, great, you're taking in tons of energy. But if you don't move a lot in the day and you don't get a ton of regular exercise, it's not a great thing to be taking in tons and tons of energy from fruit. And so it's really the animal foods that they've been so maligned, especially red meat. And yet red meat is one of the best iron-rich sources in our diet. We need all of these minerals and micronutrients in order to thrive. And you basically don't need any vegetables. And it sounds pretty funny, but all you have to do is look at a comparison chart between the two, and you'll be blown away.
Well, I'm slowly learning all this. Like, once again, unfortunately, as docs, nutrition is not well taught, whether it's medical school or beyond. It's not a priority, which, this is why we're talking about it now. But yeah, it's just, you've been told you got to eat your vegetables. I mean, I got 3 young sons, like, boys, eat your vegetables. You know what I mean? And yeah, you're slowly realizing in terms of the value. So like, yeah, what I guess the only value I could think of for the vegetables from what you're describing is maybe the fiber. Is that fair to say? Or what about like antioxidants and all that? Like, when you say micronutrients, are you including that as well?
Yeah. So one of the people always talk about the antioxidants in fruits and vegetables, but the master antioxidant in the body is actually glutathione, and it's made of 3 amino acids, and we get it from animal foods, and it's one of the most powerful antioxidants that we can get, but we never talk about it. It's so powerful, and it's the master antioxidant in the body. And if you eat a lot of collagen rich foods, you eat a lot of collagen and a lot of meat, you're going to get that, from it. There's also research showing that in babies that were weaned onto meat instead of plant foods, they were associated with higher brain size. And so this actually made the Canadian government revise their guidelines and recommendations when the recommendations that they made to weaning babies onto meat, including meat, as an option, because there was such an association with a larger brain size. So, I mean, you tell me where the nutrients are, but the antioxidants, you can get all of that from meat and from animal foods. And I'm not saying, again, don't eat the vegetables and the fruit. I eat them, but you just want to be selective with the ones that you have. And if you are eating a lot of those foods, especially fruit, you want to be moving your body a lot so that you can utilize that energy. And it's not just like being stored and causing this excess storage of energy on the body, which manifests as excess fat on the body.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I think even in our house, we lean more towards the vegetables over the fruits for that reason. Like the boys are active, so they could eat whatever they want. But, mom and dad, yeah, emphasis on vegetables over the fruit just because of that less of an insulin spike. But yeah, this is golden stuff. What about the cholesterol tip? Like, people worry about eating too much red meat and messing up their cholesterol profile. Any thoughts towards that, Vanessa?
This is one of my favorite topics because cholesterol is the most misunderstood molecule in the whole body. And just when you start talking about cholesterol, people's eyes glaze over because it's been so overcomplicated. But it's very, very simple. I mean, our blood is mostly made of water. As you know, it's aqueous. So we need cholesterol in order to act as these little ferries to shuttle different fats around in our bodies because they're not water soluble. So cholesterol actually acts as a molecule to ferry fats from our fat tissues, from our fat cells, to our other organs to be utilized for energy. And so when people go on ketogenic diets, their cholesterol goes up. It's because they're using more of their fat from fat cells. So you're going to see it more in the blood. But there's also so many other things about cholesterol. Cholesterol is so vital for the body. All of our sex hormones are made from cholesterol, from the cholesterol molecule. It's a steroid molecule. So all of our hormones in the body are either peptide hormones or they're steroid hormones, and they're made from cholesterol. And it's so important. All of our estrogens made from it, all of our testosterone's made from it, and our bodies make about 1,300 milligrams of cholesterol per day, and only 20% of that comes from the diet. So if you're eating foods that are high in cholesterol, it's actually a good thing. But if you're eating a lot of it, your body will just make a little bit less that day. If you get, say you eat more eggs on a day, you get more cholesterol from the body, from the diet. And it's so important for our hormones that actually bodybuilders in the 1930s, they used to eat like 30 eggs a day because it was a natural steroid, because they would get all this testosterone and all these sex hormones from eating all this cholesterol. And it's been so maligned. And people think, well, HDL is the only good cholesterol, and LDL is bad cholesterol, but we need cholesterol so much, and there's actually research showing the inverse, that people who had higher LDL had lower mortality rates. But now when we look at things, doctors are told, well, these are the reference ranges for cholesterol. If they're out of range, you must prescribe a statin. And statins, interfere with a lot of the natural healthy processes that cholesterol does in the body. And it's made people so afraid of eating red meat, of eating whole eggs, these whole foods that are so nutritious for us. And thankfully, we're starting now to see revisions in this. So we're starting to see Harvard, acknowledge that cholesterol is not bad for us, that red meat is not bad for us. All these institutions are starting to formally recognize these mistakes that were made. And it's so important because not only is this such an important part of the diet, to eat these foods that have healthy fats in them, but it's also so important as we grow in life, and the elderly in our population who are so precious to us, they need more protein than an average adult does. So because we have so much muscle loss as people age, and it really causes significant deterioration in the body if there isn't adequate protein being provided. And people are afraid of eating protein because every time you eat protein, fat comes with it. And yet these are healthy fats. These are healthy foods that we need to be eating.
Man, I love that point you make about our elderly patients, because, it's going to just get worse right now. Like, our baby boomers are getting into the prime time use of healthcare resources. This is our whole area of research too. And the funny thing is, like, I don't, once again, I'm not in the nutrition headspace, but when you see these like boosts, like for our older frail patients, they have those energy drinks boosts and so forth. I don't know how much protein's in that bad boy, but you're going to think I'm crazy, but we used to drink them when we were on call, just like it's 3 a.m, 4 a.m. There's no food around. You just drink a boost. Yes, you could judge me, but that tastes as sweet as molasses. So I don't know what the protein content in that bad boy is, but maybe we really need to think about this. Like, one of my colleagues, Darren Highland, he's big in the nutrition space in critical care or ICU patients, but I don't know if we talk about this. Like, when you look at what we give our patients, it's a lot. It seems like a lot of glucose without me putting a lens on it. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe we should be, as you're saying, like really thinking about, hey, high protein fat
maybe that's okay, especially if our patients are frail. Like, it's a great point you bring up here.
So important, because in order to trigger muscle protein synthesis, you need to hit a certain leucine threshold. And to hit that leucine threshold, you need about 30 grams of protein at a meal. And some of the highest foods that are highest in leucine are all the meats, but also milk is actually the highest, whole milk, and then like ribeye and chicken and, fish. All of these foods, they'll trigger the muscle protein synthesis because the amount of leucine increases in the bloodstream. And if you are not eating 30 grams of protein at a minimum at a meal, you won't trigger muscle protein synthesis. And it's so critical for children, for adults, but so much more for the aging population. And I love that you're saying that, because all my prayers would be answered if like the approach to medicine started really shifting. And there's incredible work being done, just even at McMaster's University. Dr. Stu Phillips, he's done a lot of great research on this. Dr. Don Lehman, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, they've really studied this. They're some of the top protein researchers in the world. And they've been writing letters and begging, institutions to be changing their recommendations on our food guidelines, because they understand how important it is. So you have to meet that minimum in order to trigger muscle protein synthesis. And if that's in 3 meals in a day, that's 30 grams of protein at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that means no cereal and orange juice and bagels and, what are those toaster strudel things or whatever? That's not breakfast. There's no protein in that. That means breakfast has to have eggs in it. It has to have some kind of protein so that you can, if it's eggs and steak or eggs and some milk, like whole milk or yogurt, like we need that at every meal. And most people are having orange juice and cereals for their first meal of the day, and it's setting you up for your blood sugar roller coaster to be going all day long, and you're not going to meet muscle protein synthesis. So I'm so glad to hear you, talking about this, because it's a total game changer.
Yeah, because Vanessa, honestly, like every critically ill patient, like, first of all, frailty is a killer. Like once you start to get into that frail realm as we age, like our group has studied this many times, your chance of survival, your risk of infections and morbidity, your length of stay, your cost to the system, all are higher. And we see our patients constantly. Even you're 80 plus, you're in ICU for whatever reason, 2 days later, we already see you lose your muscle mass. So yeah, I really think we should rethink our approach. I might send you an email to the names that you mentioned, the McMaster crew, and just see what they're throwing down. Cause like we got a pretty resourceful group in terms of trying to create content. And sometimes, like I've been approached since we were doing this conference about a couple groups and saying, oh, we've been trying to get more, increase the profile and let people know about low carb and keto. And sometimes you just got to create the magic, Like sometimes we can't wait for these organizations to back you up. Sometimes you just got to produce it, show what the value is, get the testimonials, and people will ride the train. You know what I mean? Because you really got my mind grapes going there.
I love that. And, you're speaking about frailty. Just one last thing. A lot of people don't realize that bone is mineralized protein. They think protein is muscles, and it's muscles, and you can trigger muscle protein synthesis by eating lots of protein, but your bone is mineralized protein. It's more than 50% protein. So if you're eating a lot of protein, you're going to strengthen those bones too.
Amen. Just because you brought up some of the research, and let me know if I'm speaking out of turn a little bit. Certainly I'm more in tune with the fasting world. Like there isn't that much long-term studies to show the benefits or what have you. Most of them are short terms or looking at diabetics and so forth. Have you come across anything long-term or in terms of the benefits of ketogenic approaches?
There's a lot of research out there. I can send you an article that is a meta-analysis of 22 studies comparing low carb and low fat. And low carb diets had better health markers, more fat loss, and better results in 21 of the 22 studies. And in the only one that it didn't, it had parity in the results. So there's been a lot of meta-analysis done on it, done in these trials. I think long term right now, we mostly have anecdotal research, but we also have all of human history, which is where people were mostly eating this kind of way. People were mostly eating low carb. It's only in the last 100, even 50 to 60 years that we've had these lifestyles of extreme convenience. And if you look at all of human history, most of what we were eating was meat and some plant foods, and that's basically low carb and keto. So if you just look at our history, you can see that it's what's gotten us to here. And now there's these very dangerous narratives coming up of like, you need to be plant-based in order to be healthy and in order to save the planet. And none of these narratives are really rooted in actual science, in actual logic, because, if we had been eating plant-based, humans probably wouldn't be here today. And if you look at the science and you understand the biochemistry, it's very simple to see this, and you start making these connections and understanding it. But I think that now we have some of the first studies there's the first study being done right now on carnivore diets. And I think that's going to be really exciting to see some of the results from. But long term, I think you just have to look at our history, and you'll be able to see we've thrived on meat for millennia.
Yeah, and the only reason I push it is because we got, a lot of our audience is medical, and docs, a favorite question: what's the evidence? What's the paper? What's the meta-analysis? And I think that's part of the barrier in the medical community, but you got to start from somewhere, I think. And to your point about plant-based, so I interviewed a plant-based person, Amy Longard, actually, a couple of days back. It was interesting to hear the different perspectives, and just because there's so much out there. Like, we were talking a lot about that. I don't know if you saw that documentary Game Changers, like with the mixed martial artist showing the benefits of plant-based. So it got a lot of love. Like, boys from back home that, I'm from Alberta originally. So boys from back home were like, "Do you see this? I think I'm going plant-based." Like they just were just totally switching gears there, at least short term. But
if you look at the athletes, many of the athletes featured in that film have had sustained injuries since then. And one of the problems with not getting adequate protein is you're not able to recover rapidly. And we're seeing that a lot of the athletes that were featured in that film, that happened. And a lot of the science they used in the movie was debunked by doctors who are in the low carb space, who showed tricks and things that they did with testing the vials of blood, and they did it themselves, and they showed like none of that stuff was real. But in order to be able to recover quickly, you need to have protein, and it needs to be from a good source. The amino acids in animal foods are made for us. The amino acids that are in plants are designed to grow plants, so they're never going to be complete. They're never going to be absorbed the same way. And, I think it's just from being there myself, from being plant-based for 17 years and seeing my health deteriorate to the point where my naturopathic doctor, who was a vegetarian, recommended I start eating meat again. He even knew like that, I think you can do that lifestyle if you want to do it. But in order to have optimal health on that, you have to work really hard at it and make sure that you are replacing B12, you are getting all the protein that you need and all the fat-soluble vitamins and nutrients that you can't get. And vegan diets, to me, are very dangerous. It's very difficult to get all of the adequate nutrition on it, at least with plant-based. Some people are pescatarian. They'll have some like fish or, eggs in there as a source of protein and choline and all these B vitamins. But as a vegan, it's very difficult, and I think very risky if people are raising their children or babies that way as well. But there's a lot of disinformation out there right now. And, if you study biochemistry, you can see and understand these things. And most physicians do study biochemistry. And that's why a lot of physicians like yourself are kind of coming to this realization that, it's all in the science, you find your way there.
Yeah, no, well put. I just find it all fascinating how, you're just getting it from both sides, but it's certainly in the movie, it's clearly biased, clearly not solid science, but it just got people thinking, like people aren't naturally analytical, right? The one question I think we should really clarify is, like, what are in your opinion, downsides to ketogenic diets? Or better yet, are there people that you think shouldn't go on it?
I think there's definitely always going to be contraindications. So, you always want to make sure you explore it, do your due diligence, talk with your physician about it. But if you're doing keto in the proper way, like, there's lots of different ways that people do keto. Some people do keto with like a lot of convenience type keto foods, which are highly processed. And that's not necessarily going to be that much better. It'll probably be a little bit better, but the main goal is you're eating unprocessed real food. And I can't think of anyone in the world that you could say eating just real protein, vegetables, real food that's non-processed would be bad for any human being. I mean, that's just, it's whole foods that are unprocessed, unadulterated, that's going to be good for all humans. And I think that when you look at keto, there's lots of different ways that people look at it. I look at it as a whole foods diet where you are removing sugar and grains and toxic seed oils and vegetable oils. And those are 4 of the most inflammatory foods. So if you remove those, your health is going to benefit just from removing sugar, grains, inflammatory seed oils, because it's going to lower inflammation in the body. It's also going to lower insulin in the body. So I think we see a lot of people go off medication because of that. Their blood pressure goes down, because when insulin is lowered, the kidneys don't reabsorb as much sodium in the distal tubule. So a lot of sodium is released and blood pressure comes down. So people go off medication. But, if someone is on a lot of medication, you have to do these interventions with your doctor and slowly, because the changes can be very rapid, because it can make a big difference. And if someone wants to live their lives without drugs and medication, in some cases that's going to be possible just from eating real food, a whole food diet. I think that you can't really argue that removing sugar from your diet and, inflammatory foods, it would be bad for anybody.
Well put. And I think it was a good point to emphasize too, which we alluded to before, but literally, hearing patients coming off of their diabetic meds, coming off of their antihypertensives in weeks, like needing physician support just to make sure they're not getting too drowsy and their blood pressure is not too low, or they're getting hypoglycemic. Like, that's real, crew. And this is, in the context of COVID, is especially when we know these are risk factors for getting ill. Like, this is the time to step up, like, to realize that you have options. You really, we're talking, and like I said, this isn't like 8 months down the road. You could have results in weeks. So really well put. But any side effects though, like in terms of, like, the only one I could think of is like, initially it could be difficult to, like, you hear about people having a difficulties initiating. I've heard people say that it could be like, I don't know, forgive me for being frank, but constipating. Like, any things that come to mind that also people could expect.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about constipation all the time in low carb and keto. It's a big topic. I talk about it on the podcast all the time. Dr. Paul Mason, who is in New Zealand, I've had him on the show a lot, and we've had a lot of.
He's going to be in the conference.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, he's doing August 9th.
His knowledge on cholesterol and on fiber and constipation and all of that is just unparalleled. He's so good at explaining the concepts too. But I think one of the things that can happen is people experience, it used to be called like keto flu. A lot of it is just sort of withdrawal from carbohydrates. So people will feel like a transitionary period where they may be a little slower. And a lot of that is actually just because of mineral loss. So we talked about how when your insulin is lower, your kidneys don't reabsorb as many of your minerals and electrolytes. And so people then usually need to supplement with some sodium, because we get a lot of sodium from processed foods, especially like there's more sodium in a McDonald's milkshake than there is sugar. So, and there's sodium in Coca-Cola, there's sodium in all these sweet foods that we don't even know it's everywhere. So when you cut that food out and you're just eating real foods, then you have much lower sodium that you're getting. So it's always suggested to, add sodium to your food, add salt to your food to taste. But if you look at some of the data out there, I have some charts showing that the current recommendations for sodium as they are actually associated with the highest mortality, whereas lowest mortality is associated with around anywhere from 2,400 to about 5,000 milligrams of sodium in a day. So about 2.5 teaspoons of salt is associated with the lowest mortality. And then even at double that, you still don't even have as high mortality as with low salt. So sodium is so important, as you know, for the sodium-potassium pump, for basically all of our cellular function. And so sometimes people will feel a little fatigued or off because they've dropped a lot of their minerals. So people like to supplement with sodium. You don't really have to supplement with potassium because so much of it in beef, in salmon, in all these foods, which is why you salt your food to taste to balance it out. And people add in magnesium. So usually with constipation, it's a lack of magnesium. And it's probably the main supplement that most people should be taking is some form of magnesium, because our food is so depleted of magnesium, and it's so vital as, for almost every function in the body, even, our DNA replication. We need magnesium for almost every function. So supplementing with electrolytes, usually salt, makes a big difference. And that period of adjustment as you keto adapt, it usually only lasts a week at the most. But yeah, it's very transient. And once you keto adapt, so you start, making your own ketones and having access to your own body fat for fuel, you'll feel great as long as you get your electrolytes balanced. That's usually the main issue.
Awesome. Excellent.
Another thing with hydration, I just want to say is it can be a delicate balance of finding that hydration, because you want to drink, half your body weight in ounces of water. And if you're not supplementing with sodium, you're going to flush out a lot of the sodium too. So that's why you also need to add it in.
Yes, I'm trying to do that math. So if I'm 200 pounds, how much water should I be drinking?
So about 100 ounces.
100 ounces? So, okay. I'll do the math later. 30 cc's per ounce. So yeah, 3 liters. Yeah, that's no problem.
Yeah.
Amaze balls. And I got another selfish question.
Sure.
Athletes, man, like you I got a sports nutritionist in the mix. I got to ask, like, are there clear upsides? Like we talked about potentially getting better recovery and stuff, but yeah, I just want to hear from the expert herself. Are there added benefits to going ketogenic as I don't want to call myself athlete, but like someone that likes to perform?
Right. So it totally depends on the type of activity you're doing. So if the activity that you do, say you're an endurance runner, you're predominantly going to be running at 60 to 70% of your VO2 max. And that's where your oxidation substrate is fat. So if you're keto and you're able to burn your fat, you're going to do really well on ultra endurance, on any kind of endurance sport, because you're really well adapted to burning your own fat. You're not going to hit that wall where most people, about 2,000 calories in, which is the most that you can store in glycogen in your liver. You hit that wall and then you just feel horrible. So people carb load and then they go run, and then they get to that point where, they they have to push in to that fat mode. But if you're already fat adapted, then you're really going to do well in that. You really, really have to dial in your electrolytes if you're doing a lot of endurance sport, because you lose so many when you're sweating. There's a lot of
fascinating. Sorry to interrupt, but that's fascinating that, because like I think a lot of endurance athletes will experience, as you're describing, that like that lull or whatever the term would be, where you're just like, I need more juice. But if you're fat adaptive, like less likely to experience it. Yeah, that's excellent. Sorry.
Yeah, one of my favorite athletes, Sean Seiko, he's a keto athlete in South Africa, and we have a lot of back and forth. I have him on the show a couple times, and he's a keto cyclist, and he just did a 9-hour ride to raise money for the Tim Noakes Foundation in South Africa. And he didn't refuel, he didn't pre-fuel, he just used his body fat, and he didn't bonk. He was just 9 hours of riding. And people can't get over it. They always think like, oh, you're going to need these gels and these, supplement packs and these glucose drinks and all these things. Like, if you're drinking glucose with sodium in it, it will help the sodium get into your cell better because of the glucose transporters. But you don't need any of that if you're a fat adapted athlete. So there's a lot of athletes that are now coming out saying that they've been low carb. If you look at ultra endurance runner Zach Bitter, he just broke 2 world records, and he's a carnivore runner. And he does have some like low carb when he's doing training, but for the most part, he's a keto, low carb, meat-based athlete, and he's breaking world records. So, there's benefits in performance depending on the sport that you're doing. It would be different if you're doing sprinting, or, you might want to be more glucose fueled, but metabolic flexibility means you can burn both, fuels. So I think there's also benefits in recovery, because you need protein to recover. And if you're eating a lot of meat and protein in your diet and a lot of collagen-rich foods, you're going to be able to make those antioxidants, like we talked about, like glutathione, and that's going to help repair, and it's going to provide a buffer to all of that DNA damage or the damage that can happen during exercise.
And what about for strength training?
Yeah, I think, protein is every bodybuilder's, main fuel, right? And the more I've been doing this and the longer that I've been doing this, the more I myself eat like a bodybuilder, and realize that even though I'm not a competitive bodybuilder, I'm building my body every day with what I eat, So if you eat a lot of protein, like I added 8 pounds of lean mass in 2 years without doing any exercise. I was in school, studying biochem, and I added 8 pounds of lean mass just by eating more meat, a lot more meat. And I've added in strength training in the past year, because I'm now doing another body scan in October to see how much muscle I could add in a year, just adding all of this protein in. And that's one of the places that we're really seeing a lot of people joining this like carnivore or zero carb or keto is now in the athletic space, because they're seeing this competitive edge that you can get. And, bodybuilders eat more protein than anyone else. And studies have been done by Dr. Jose Antonio on protein overfeeding studies, where they saw there were no negative outcomes on the body from eating really high protein diets, even though people are so afraid of that. In resistance trained individuals, protein is, the best thing that you can have. So people just seem to have like extreme gains and lean gains doing it this way.
Yeah. And and to further your point too, you increase that lean muscle mass, you improve your metabolic rate. Like there's a lot of upside by upping your lean body mass or lean muscle mass. So commend you for your efforts. That's awesome. Vanessa, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. As someone that is keto ignorant, that is, hearing a lot in the nutrition space, is new to the nutrition space, your information, your knowledge, you was incredible. You're queen of this bad boy. And I really appreciate this conversation. And in fact, I'm putting it out in the universe that we have to have you back. We have to have you back.
You anytime.
And where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at my podcast. It's called Fast Keto. I have a weekly podcast where I interview protein scientists and doctors all around the world on keto and protein. My Instagram is where I share a lot of updates. It's at Ketogenic Girl, and YouTube is the same, Ketogenic Girl. And I share a lot of vlogs there. I share like what I eat in a day and, my fitness routines and different, interviews and science behind all of this stuff. And yeah, I love that I get to do this.
Absolutely. And guys, we'll point you towards the 2-parter with Rob Wolf. I thoroughly enjoyed that episode, learned a lot too. So yeah.
And I should mention.
Yes, you can't forget the book.
It's called Keto Essentials, and
yes.
On Amazon.
We'll have links in the show notes as well. Vanessa, keep killing it. I love it. We were so excited to have you, and what a privilege. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolutely. Crew, tell me that wasn't full of knowledge. Tell me that wasn't a gangster episode, y'all. Like we said, we are just trying to empower you, give you options to get healthier during this pandemic and beyond. So thank you once again for Vanessa for representing hard. If you guys love the show, please leave comments on iTunes, on Spotify. Give us a 5-star rating. That means the world to us, and it improves the visibility of our show. As you know, August 9th, we're having our first virtual summit on low-carb and ketogenic approaches to health. This is going to have our experts, Ivor Cummins, Joy Kitty, Dr. Paul Mason. It's going to be luscious. So please tune in for that. Any comments, leave at quadcast99@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And once again, thanks everybody for listening, and we're going to connect real soon. Thank you.